in the wrapper.
Yeah, you have to hold it in the wrapper, like he said, because for a different reason. I'm not worried about getting my steering wheel dirty. I'm worried about getting the ice cream sandwich dirty from my hands.
All right, thank you very much.
Sure. Ozzy, can you get in here, please? Thank you. Okay. So I ran into Ozzy out there. I used to work for him for 10 years. And actually, interestingly enough, when I was out there, he didn't know what my topic was. And he asked me if I was nervous. And I said, well, now that I know that you're here. And he said, that's okay. You can just laugh at yourself. And I said, well, that's the topic of my talk, you know. So he knows me. But yeah, the idea here is that this is something that's harder for some people than others, which is just being yourself. A lot of people feel that they need to put a lot of barriers between them and the world, and be confident and smooth and perfect. And that way you can show that your product is smooth and perfect, and everyone will trust you and buy from you. But I promise you that that's not the way the world works. I want to start here by sharing a minute or two from an old TED Talk from 2011. This is Brene Brown talking about the power of vulnerability and what that is. I have to get on the right screen, so you'll bear with me while I do that. There we go, and we're going to see what other things get played on this computer. It's not mine.
Wow.
Yeah, this is not my computer. I think you'd see some like Black Sabbath and stuff on there otherwise. Here we go. Okay. And we get the wrong place, but that's okay because I
problem is,
and I know where we go. Here we are. And if this doesn't work, I know what
came to my mind, we're wholehearted. These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the Miller folder, and I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern?
She's talking about people who
my husband left town
figure out how
for
to
kids.
connect with people.
Because I always go into this kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing.
So before I even let her talk about what she's talking about, what did she just say about herself, right? She said she's a researcher, she does research, and she's a mother. And in order for her to do her job, which is research, she goes crazy. And her kids have to leave town, right? She's admitting something about herself that makes herself vulnerable. So she doesn't even talk about herself doing that. But if we watch it, when we hear that, we connect with it. Maybe we judge her, maybe we don't, but she at least opened up and told us something about herself. So I just wanted to point that out.
Or I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, it's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And so these
I'll start with
had
this. A couple of years
very
ago,
simple
an event
courage
planner
to be
called me because I
imperfect.
was going to do a speaking event. She called and she said,
We
They
did
had the
her twice.
compassion
I'm really struggling with
to be
how
kind
to
to
write about
themselves
you on a little
first and
flyer.
then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with
Well,
other
I
people
saw
if
you
we can't
speak,
treat
and
ourselves.
I'm going to call you a researcher.
And the last
We're
was
gonna
they had
stop.
connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity.
That's okay. We don't
Yeah.
mind. We can deal with
Okay, she
fear.
said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're
Here
a
we go.
storyteller, so I
Okay.
think what I'll
So I really got the part what I wanted to, which
do
is the
just
idea
call
of
you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me.
okay. We're going to talk about her while looking at someone else's slide. So she's talking about courage, which is really speaking from the heart. And then she goes on to talk about vulnerability and how vulnerability builds trust and what being vulnerable really means, right? It means saying something without those barriers that maybe people won't like. It's just who you are. And it's taking that risk. And when you do it, it allows a number of things to happen. I don't need the video. I just want to stay on the slide I was just on.
This one?
Yeah, that's my presentation, and I just want to go right back to that farce and keys. Perfect. Awesome. Cool. Okay. So, and this is a recurring theme that got really popular in the early 2000s, this whole idea of failing, right? Which is part of being vulnerable. If you're vulnerable, it means there's a chance that you put yourself out there and it fails, right? So in the Harvard Business Review in 2002, there was this article called The Failure Tolerant Leader. And when we're talking about sales, we're not necessarily talking about leading, except with all the whole challenger sales stuff. We want to lead. We do want to lead, basically. We want to lead the customer and help push them towards what we want because it's what's best for them, and educate them about it and teach them about it, etc. And in order to be a very successful leader, what Farson and Keyes wrote about is that it's really important to be able to admit your mistakes and not cover them up or shifting the blame. And that doing that actually lets people respect you more, it lets them trust you more, and it builds that relationship. Now there are pitfalls, and we're going to talk about them, but one that's very relevant right here is it can't be core to what you are, right? So Ozzy has a recruiting company. I can't on the call say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm a really bad recruiter. It doesn't work. But some examples just from today's Kenneth. So Claudia said that she wrote in her second LinkedIn message to people, sorry, my Spanish is not that good, right? So she's not selling her Spanish translator skills. So it's okay that she says that. And by saying that and not pretending like she has good Spanish or having a translator fake for her that she has good Spanish and then later on saying, oh, that wasn't me, that was a translator, right? She's just being honest. And yes, there's a chance that they're going to say, oh, well, if her Spanish is not that good, I don't want to work with her. But on the other hand, people do appreciate that honesty and admitting their flaws. Another example from that, and so I'm actually, as a salesperson, and I always say it this way, I'm really bad with names and faces. So it's hard to be a good salesperson that way, but it's not actually integral to my role. I probably wouldn't say it in an interview, but I do tell my prospects that. So I forgot the lovely gentleman's name who introduced me. I'm sorry. What's your name?
Blair.
Blair. Okay. So Blair said that he spent time in Jerusalem for Hanukkah with his kids, and he survived, right? There's so much there between the lines. And he shared that with us. He basically told us it was challenging. He sometimes has a hard time with his kids, but he enjoyed it because he smiled and laughed. And he's kind of glad it's over, okay? So all of that is stuff that he told us and shared with us, and now we can feel closer to him as a result. And that leads us to your own personal touch, okay? So being human, being something related that other than just the salesperson. So Ron, who's sitting here in the audience, works on my team. He helped me redo the whole presentation because I lost it. And he was listening to the things I was talking about, and he said, oh, that's what I call leveraging reality to achieve results. That was today, he said that. So examples of my reality is I have 5 kids. I'm a single mom. I'm a vegetarian. I've never been to Hong Kong, right? These are all things that in the past month I've talked about during my sales conversations because they're real and they were relevant. So this is actually an example. This is a huge enterprise company. It's actually a guy in Brazil that I'm talking to here, although it's not a Brazilian company, so it works out. So he tells me he's out for lunch. I WhatsApp with a lot of my clients, even the big enterprise ones. I find it's a good way if they're going silent to just surprise them on a different channel. And so he told me he's going out to lunch, and he'll let me know as soon as he gets back. He's got a little typo there. And I decided to send him a whole bunch of food emoticons. And he laughed. And then I took a risk. I thought about this. I actually felt kind of vulnerable, especially since it's South America and people love meat in South America. And I was like, he won't respect me anymore if he knows I'm a vegetarian. But I wrote, I'm a vegetarian, so I didn't send you any meat-a-cons. And he said he also is. Look at that. We had something new to talk about, a new point of connection. It was a risk. I put myself out there, but it worked this time. Maybe he would have said, I don't understand vegetarians. I'm like, that's okay, Ron likes meat. You can work with him. You know, I don't know. Okay. So, this brings us to an interesting concept, because bids are two-way. It's not just one direction. It's not just me laying myself out there and saying, hey, this is me. Come buy stuff from me. What happens when you open up is that the other person often opens up too. And one of the most important things that you can do in any relationship, of course, I've just told you I'm single, so I'm mid-divorce, and here I'm giving relationship advice. But one of the most important things in every relationship is recognizing when someone else is opening up and being vulnerable and responding to that. So I don't know if Claudia enjoyed me mentioning her not being good at Spanish, and I don't know if I forgot his name again. Blair. I don't know if Blair, liked me talking about Jerusalem. But when somebody does reference back, when you reference back something that somebody told you, right, you're letting them know that they were heard, that you listened to them, that you thought about what they said, and it deepens the connection even more. So Gottman is a psychologist, I don't know. He's spent decades studying relationships. And there's some cool stuff you can watch. And he did a bunch of video recordings of couples. And what he found is that the strongest relationships were based off of how often they turned towards each other. And what turning towards each other meant is both how many times they had made bids to each other, that they were vulnerable, and that the other person responded, right? Because if you open yourself up and then that you just ignore it, if he says, if I say I'm a vegetarian and he just doesn't say anything, then I'm going to feel a little hurt, but I don't care because I'm trying to sell to him. But if it's the other way around, then that's serious, right? What if he tells me something and I'm so focused on my sales pitch that I don't stop and acknowledge, oh, he was vulnerable. Let's talk about that, right? So that's really important. Simply recognizing that a bid has been made opens the door to response. If you've really been paying attention, you'll respond to both the text and the subtext. And that's where we talk about reading between the lines. And we've been doing a lot of sales training on our team at Law Geeks. And that's one of the biggest things that I try to focus on is reading between the lines. What is this person saying to you? And how can you respond to what they're not saying is just super key. And it's very related to the authenticity because it's recognizing when the other person's being authentic with you as well. So let's talk about the problems. Where can this go wrong? So the first thing is lying, right? People want to connect, so they try and latch on, oh, you told me something, I'm going to respond to your bid by lying. So I asked my team for examples, and someone on my team, she's not in sales. She gave an example when somebody was trying to sell to her. She was interviewing them, actually. And she's from Malaysia. And it came up in conversation. She mentioned she's from Malaysia. And their reaction was, wow, I've always wanted to go to Malaysia. Now, I don't know. Nobody laughed here. She laughed. I mean, in her head, because who wants to go to Malaysia? I mean, maybe if somebody gave you a free ticket, you'd be like, oh, that would be interesting. But when you have like a list of top places you want to go, usually Malaysia is not going to show up, right? So that actually made her feel more distant from him because she could tell that he was not being authentic, and it just made her trust him less. Politics. It's generally safe to stay away from it. I've seen example, Ron here has successfully talked about Hong Kong politics with somebody in Hong Kong. But it's challenging. It's easier if you're not from the country, so you don't have an opinion, and then you can just listen to them. If you have an opinion, stay away from politics. Religion, right? I mean, these are kind of basics, but again, there's times when it works. So I'm Shomer Shabbat. I tell people that. So, if I say I'm not available, I don't make up some reason usually. Sometimes I'll say I'll be off the grid. But if there's time, I will explain, well, I'm actually Orthodox Jewish, so I don't work on, and it actually makes them trust me more because I'm sticking to my values, right? And they're getting to know me. There was a guy in my team who told me he was working with somebody who's Mormon, and the guy was telling him that he was Mormon. And my guy said, well, I have different beliefs, but I respect yours. So, again, it's a little bit iffy. I wouldn't go there on purpose. Fake empathy. Somebody tells you something bad happened and you don't care. Don't pretend to care. Acknowledge that something bad happened to them. And then, you should care if you're a good person, basically. But if you don't care, don't pretend to care, because that's worse than not caring. People can tell. And then talking too much, right? They're not your therapist. They don't want to be your therapist. It's not about you. So if you bring something up, you have to think about, well, how's it going to help them to know that, right? How can I make it about them? Even if it's me telling them something, it has to be for them that I'm telling it to them. And then the other pitfall I already said, so I didn't put it on this list, which is it can't be a core competency. I can't say, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't follow up. I'm just really bad at following up with people, even though I'm a salesperson. I can't do that. Or we have a software that reads legal contracts, right? So I can't make a mistake in the contract and say, oh, sorry, I used my software for that and it just didn't work, You have to find a way while still being authentic to not have it be part of and you got to improve if it is related to your core competency. How am I doing on time, by the way?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay, perfect. You're gonna actually have time for questions. We can catch up some time for other people also. No worries. So impact, right? We got our dollar signs. We're salespeople at the end of the day. We want to be real people, but we also want to make money. And it can help a lot. So we closed PepsiCo in a pretty purely relationship-based way, where it got to the point where they realized that they had a bunch of budget, and they called us up and said, we have $200,000, what can we get for it, right? That's not based off of anything other than relationship, because otherwise they don't tell you how much they have, they don't ask you what they can get. They didn't say, we need this, this, and this, how much will you charge us for it, right? So that's consistent relationship. Like Claudia said, you have to keep reaching out and keeping the relationship going so that when somebody finds that extra money, it's there for you. And then it also overflows, right? So if someone sees that you are a person who's comfortable talking about flaws, then they trust that when you talk about your product, that you're also telling them all the flaws in your product. And by the way, the big flaws you need to, right? To talk about the product capabilities. And I have many stories of when the way that I've sold was to tell people they shouldn't buy. I'm like, no, you don't have a good use case. Oh, wait a second, why not? I think I do. I think you're not being innovative enough. Of course I have a good use case. And then they have to sell to me why they should buy. There are definitely a lot of times when you should undersell. It doesn't work all the time. You have to understand. But if somebody doesn't have a clear use case and you're not confident that the product's really going to work for them, you need to tell them, and you can't be scared it's going to lose you the deal. Oftentimes it isn't the converse. People don't trust salespeople, so if you tell them it won't work for them, they don't believe you. And then you can also have more fun. I know it's not easy for everyone to be open and vulnerable and put themselves out there. But if you're not always worrying, well, what will they think? Or, oh, I've got to have this strong section between my personal and my professional, right? If you can relax a bit, then you can potentially enjoy yourself a lot more than you could otherwise. So I'm done. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
So the whole topic was about the authenticity. So my question is, how do you feel about actually presenting your dilemma? Because you just mentioned. Do I need it? So you just mentioned a scenario where you believe that this product or service is not necessarily for your prospect, right? It's not the perfect fit. What's your take on presenting your dilemma, saying something like, one part of me obviously wants to make the sale, right? I want you as a customer, I want you as a client. Another part is not really sure if this is the perfect fit for you, so I'm not really sure where to go from here, right?
Well, you just did. Does this work? Whew. Okay, well, I'm loud, so that's okay. You did a beautiful thing right now.
It works.
Hello? It works? Okay, there we go. So you did a beautiful thing right now, which is called being here and now. So what that is that when you talked about the dilemma, you shared your feelings about the dilemma. So I would actually present it, if that was my feeling, that's not usually how I feel, but if that's like my thoughts and feelings, that is how I would present it. I would say, I'm struggling right now because I really like you, I want to work with you, I'm a salesperson, I like to make money, but I don't think that your pain and my solution necessarily are going to fit. And these are the reasons why. What do you think we should do? And then they'll either try to talk me out of it, or they'll say, I appreciate your honesty, I'm going to recommend you. Always ask for referrals, right? I think this is something I learned from Ozzy when he trained me on a hilltop with 3 families in the West Bank 15 years ago in sales. And he said, you always have to ask for referrals. You don't get off of a call, especially one that it's like a negative, like whatever, they're not going to buy from you. Okay, well, who should I talk to, right? They trust you. You just told them not to buy from them. The next place they work, their situation changes, your product changes, it becomes relevant. You're their number one guy. And not only because you told them no, but because you shared your internal struggle and you were honest about what you wanted and what they wanted and you put them first. Does that help?
Yes.
What I said to you, what I said was, you always want to get a referral, but if it's a bad conversation, you always want to leave with a piece of information about the person.
Oh, yeah.
So that becomes a win. So you leave that call feeling like there's a win, A, so you feel good about it, and B, you have another piece of data that you've obtained that you can follow the person on the next time.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else? Okay.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.